The end. Something every culture that has ever existed has contemplated for all of eternity.
From Ragnarok of Norse mythos, the apocalypse of Christianity, zombies, supervolcanoes, meteors, or supernovas.
The end of the world has been discussed for a very long time. And in the light of the announcement of its next installment, I decided to go back and play a duology, soon to be trilogy of games that have my personal favorite depiction of the apocalypse, thanks to its fresh yet still traditional views on the events. Of course, I'm talking about the cult favorite video game, Darksiders. The first one, specifically. Why? Well, other than the fact that you should just always start from the beginning, even though it technically takes place after 2, I had only recently gotten the chance to play it, so while it's still fresh in my mind, why didn't I give it a go? Spoilers abound. Before Darksiders, the only other games I'd played were Pokemon, the Telltale Lego games, and a few one-off Nintendo games. So this was a pretty huge change in scenery for me.
It being a hack and slash puzzle adventure game with a much faster and high octane pace than I was used to.
Now, I did play Darksiders 2 first, so I had a bit of experience going into 1. However, the dynamics of the games are different enough that it was still pretty new to me.
Darksiders was developed by Vigil Games and follows War, a horseman of the apocalypse, as he tries to clear his name from being framed for enacting the premature apocalypse.
Which is where all the killing comes in.
He fights his way across a desolate earth, mauling demons and fleeing angry angels as he attempts to destroy powerful beings known as the Chosen.
At first, I couldn't really see Darksiders as my kind of game, considering how different it was. But as soon as I gave it a shot, I was hooked. With its matchful design, expansive world, difficult yet fun puzzles and bosses, alongside a well-crafted story, I couldn't put it down.
Now let's begin with the design.
Without keeping my judgment solely focused on 1, I do have to admit it's a bit bland when compared to 2. But don't worry, I'm not going to be comparing them this whole time.
Darksiders 2 has a much more vibrant art style, which comes with the territory of where it takes place, which is the reason I was drawn to the series to begin with. However, 1 has a much more toned down palette, ranging from seldom fiery reds to grays and browns and blacks, which gets kind of plain after a while.
However, there is sometimes a break where we get much more vibrant environments.
Such as the Drowned Pass, which is decorated with a nice variety of pinks, blues, and greens.
I must say though, what's nice about this whole color scheme is that it really makes War pop. He's this bright red spot of hope, if you can even call him that, amongst all this chaos.
It really does make him stand out and shows that he is the hero of the game.
That is, of course, until you complete the Abyssal Armor, because then you just blend in with everything. At least you're doing it in style. I can't talk about the look of the game, though, without mentioning the remaster, which is what I personally played, the Warmaster Edition, which is stunning.
The amount of detail and texture put in really lets the comic book-like art style pop and really allows for each character to be expressed fully.
Although I will give the original game credit for looking as good as it did for coming out in 2010, as it had just as much intricacy and detail which contributed to the style of the game.
However, compared to the Warmastered Edition, the original has a very plasticky look, indicative of the late 2000s games. However, I personally think the game still holds up perfectly.
All of the characters are masterfully designed. Or should I say, masterfully designed. Get it? No? Okay.
Each type of character is very distinct in their appearance, with many different kinds of demons, undead, or wicked as they're called, and unique and distinctive bosses, each of which are based off of a creature associated with fear. Tiamat being a bat, the Griever being a giant bug, and so on. This game even has robots and monsters like succubi and whatever these snake things are. Even the Charred Council heads are distinctive.
The game, as I said, has a very comic book-like art style, which really sets it apart from other games of its type, which tend to take a more realistic approach with their visuals, like Halo or Dante's Inferno, for example.
And despite the game's context, unlike games like Dante's Inferno, it refrains from taking a grotesque approach to its environments, instead opting for a more fantasy-esque feel to it, just opposed by all the bloodshed.
However, this really encompasses what Darksiders is, so I'm okay with it.
Let's move on to the gameplay.
As I mentioned before, the gameplay in Darksiders is vastly different than what I'm accustomed to.
I'm not used to the constant fear of an enemy popping around a corner or getting jumped because my camera was facing the wrong way, nor the notion of actively dying, so when I played Darksiders, it was a fun challenge to force myself to get used to this more adrenaline-fueled form of play, and when I did, that's when it got really fun.
The standard gameplay is simple. It is a hack and slash after all, so it's gonna be a hack and slash.
War wields his sword Chaos Eater, and a select few other weapons which double as puzzle-solving tools along his journey. But I gotta say, War's sword is probably the best weapon in the game. It's simple and just a badass weapon.
It's in the dungeons that the gameplay really takes its turn from hack and slash to puzzle platformer, which I have heard equated to an edgier Legend of Zelda. I wouldn't know, I've never played Legend of Zelda. Inside the numerous dungeons spread throughout the world, you must traverse many different kinds of obstacles, from enemies to wall jumps to pits. But then it's the puzzles that really get difficult. I'm not gonna lie, I did have to look up how to do some of the puzzles, but that's just because they're hard. And that's probably the game's biggest and only flaw.
Some of the puzzles can be too difficult to solve, mostly because you are never explicitly told how to solve them.
Yeah, it might seem hand-holdy, but there are just some things they don't tell you. Like, I didn't know you could use the abyssal chain to grapple onto demonic growth until the end of the game. Not to mention, but this lack of explanation can make it especially difficult to beat the bosses, who take the skills you've learned from solving the puzzles in their dungeon and put them to the test.
Such as throwing dormant bombs and igniting them with the crossblade, or using portals to jump onto your enemy's back. And then there's Mercy, which literally does nothing.
Each boss battle is different. You can't just go in and beat them up. You must use your newfound skills, which you eventually do start using in staggered amounts outside of those dungeons. This keeps each location and boss different, preventing the gameplay from becoming repetitive, even if it can be really annoying at times.
Next, we have the scoring of the game.
While I do love the Darksiders soundtrack, I have to admit it's nothing groundbreaking.
It's very classic fantasy, with chanting in a foreign language, obscene but masterful drums, and blaring horns. However, this all gives it a very war cry type feel that suits the main character in the situations he finds himself in greatly, especially in the fantasy setting.
I also have to commend its lack of synthesized or modern sounding tunes, which really help you get sucked into this disparaged world devoid of human life. These more primal sounds really establish the setting and are perfect for what the game is trying to be.
Now we have the story.
Darksiders I has an amazing story, which is evident as that's one of the biggest reasons people are drawn to it.
It takes place in a time after a premature apocalypse in which angels and demons completely decimate the humans, who were supposed to also be engaged in the fight.
You see, this is where the premature comes in, because the humans weren't ready for the fight when it started. And on top of that, the Seven Seals, which basically say the angels and demons can't fight until they're broken, weren't broken.
So when War comes to aid in the fight, believing it's the actual apocalypse, the blame is thrown on him by the Charred Council, who are basically the creator's emissaries in his absence. War obviously protests and wages to kill the truly responsible, that being a beast known as the Destroyer. The Council agrees to let War wage his fight, but to keep him in check, they keep him leashed to a being called the Watcher, voiced brilliantly by Mark Hamill.
Are you not entertained?
Together, War and the Watcher traverse the desolate Earthscape, where they seek out and kill the Destroyer's chosen so that they may enter the tower in which he presides. Along the way, War meets many colorful characters, such as the demon merchant Volgrim, or the opponent of the Prince of Lies, Samael, the obscure Wicked K, and my personal favorite, Azrael, the Angel of Death. With each character, a conspiracy unfolds, and the true nature of the premature apocalypse is revealed. The Archangel Abaddon, who is revealed to be the Destroyer, Azrael, and the Maker Ulthing crafted a plan which would summon the forces of Hell to Earth by destroying the first 6 of the 7 seals, which were immediately reforged so that it would appear that Hell attacked of their own volition. However, Hell's force were very much prepared, and the End War began early. The Charred Council knew of this, however, they had no proof, so they put it on War and sent him on his killing spree so that they wouldn't have to worry about needing proof, knowing War would do it to protect his honor.
And that was just what he did. However, the more he learned about this whole conspiracy, the more he denounced the Council. Now, in the way of character development, War stays exactly the same throughout, but there is an air of gained maturity about him. He begins his journey blindly seeking the deaths of those he saw as his accusers, but in the end he was spilling blood to preserve the justice and restore balance on this torn earth. So, while his character hadn't really changed, the way his character was presented did. Darksiders is more than a simple hack and slash. I mean, why do you think so many people are drawn to it? Now, I'm not going to spout off on how it's a masterpiece. It's just a great game with very minor flaws. It tells an immaculate story that combines both traditional and original concepts of the apocalypse in a flawless fashion. The game, on a simple level, is about a choice. The choice to cheat and gain an advantage over your enemies, or the choice to uphold your virtues and your honor despite the odds. So tell me, which would you choose? Would you serve in heaven or rule?